Hi, I'm Martin Godfrey. Let me introduce you to the Woodrat. It all began with a simple idea about making dovetails, and I think I can explain it like this. Say we have a router. This is its cutter here, and the wood it's going to cut there. Then I thought, supposing you have a drawing of the joint that you want over on this side, and a pointer to tell you where you are. Now, the pointer and the cutter are in a fixed relationship. So we make the drawing and the wood in the same fixed relationship, but moving left and right in front of them. And as the pointer lines up with the drawing, so the cutter is ready to cut the wood. So switch on and cut, zing, and then move the two across so the pointer lines up with the next joint, zing, and it cuts through, and you have the wood cut with its joint exactly as is dictated by the pointer and the drawing. That's the basis of the machine, the whole principle of it, and everything follows from that simple notion. The router is the right way up, not upside down. It tracks forwards and backwards under complete control. The workpiece, hardwood, softwood, plastic, ply, chipboard, MDF, placed at any angle under the cutter to be cut with any cutter with complete freedom. And all the time, you know exactly where you are. And although perfectly logical, it works in a way quite unlike any other woodworking machine.
Mill it down easy. Mill it down easy. Mill it down easy if you really wanna blow your top. You jump, jump, yeah, and you jump, jump, yeah. Just keep on jumping, baby. You will soon be there. Mill it down easy. Mill it down easy. Mill it down easy if you really wanna blow your top.
So now what have we got? Here is the cutter. Here is the pointer. But instead of using the pointer, what we do is this. We take a thin slat of wood and cut a socket in it with whatever bit you're using. In this case, a 1/2 inch straight. Move it to the left cam clamp position and draw the size and the shape of the cutter directly onto the face of the machine. So that has established that the cutter is here and the picture of the cutter is here, and that the distance between the cutter and the picture of the cutter is exactly the same as between the two fixed fences. Let's put the workpieces in, one on the left in front of the mark and the other in front of the cutter. Now before, we had a drawing of the cutter on the left-hand side. We don't need that. All we need to do is to mark out the top of the wood here with the joint positions. And all you need is a pencil. So, as each of these positions comes in front of the mark, so the wood is lined up on the right-hand side in front of the cutter. We have the picture of the cutter, the actual wood to be cut, and the picture of the joint that we're making, moving one in front of the other. So, away we go. that's the first part. What about the second piece? Well, there's no need for any drawing now, because if we put this piece into the marker position here, that will act as a template. Each part against the mark will show us where we cut the second part. In other words, you're making your own template as you go along. The joint should fit as a joint, but at the same time, one piece should fit snugly with another without any joggle between one piece and the next. So the first frequently asked question is it complicated? And the answer to that is no. There's a lot for us to talk about, but I hope to show you that it's not complicated. Now, using a router table where you're pushing upwards with two hands and using a third hand to try and depth a bit, and then you have to push down with your chin on the whole thing to stop the whole caboodle coming off the floor. Now, that, in my book, is complicated. Mostly the wood rat is simple. You just put the wood in and cut. As you know, when using a router table, you feed the wood into the cutter, going against the spin of the blades. And because you're feeding by hand, it's the correct way . But unfortunately, you get horrendous breakout. If you go the other way, the cutter grabs the wood and flings it across the room with the strength of 2 horses. With the wood rat, we don't have these problems because the wood is held as it goes, provided that we go round clockwise, i.e. the wrong way, we get perfect, clean cutting. It's like having a power feed. So, how does the wood rat work in practice? How does it compare with what you normally do? We identify 6 basic areas of making joints. Profiling, down the board. Functional profiles like grooves and decorative profiles. Then, around the end of the board, tenoning and bridle joints. Then working across the board, trenching for dado cuts, housing joints and sliding dovetails, very important. And then cutting square holes downwards and drilling for mortising and for doweling. And then angled cuts for through dovetails and straight through cuts for sockets. And then stopped cuts for half-blind dovetails. Let's see how the wood rat gets on in each of these fields. You might find that it challenges your usual way of doing things, but then maybe they need a bit of a challenge. For example, the router. Eugen Lutz first introduced the plunge router to woodworking in 1949. It was a great idea, but it had one big disadvantage. It won't work by pushing down on just one handle. It needs 2 hands to work it, which means that you don't have a free hand to check the depth of the cutter. This was so until we at Woodrat introduced the plunge bar, all of 50 years later. Any plunge router can benefit from it, whether going freehand, squeeze it gently down, or in a router table. That, by the way, is the solution to your sticking your chin on the thing to hold it down while trying to verify the depth of the cutter. In the Woodrat, it turns the push downwards on the work with two hands action into a simple single-handed squeeze that doesn't put any pressure on the work and leaves the other hand free to check the depth of cut. Or to track the workpiece. We have plunge bars for virtually every make of plunge router, old and new. And all makes of router will work with the Woodrat. And that's frequently asked question number 2. This is hand feeding. With the router fixed, the Woodrat is working just like a router table, profiling, but the right way up. Frequent answer number 3 is, yes, it will take any length of work. The router table does have one advantage. It has gravity keeping the work on the plate. The Woodrat, on the other hand, has this, the brush. Yes, it's a scrubbing brush on a stick. It's cammed in the cam clamp and will give you whatever pressure you need to keep your work in place. Either a stiff upward push to hold it still, or a gentle push as you're sliding the work through. There's now no kickback, and the bristles keep the workpiece tight against the fence. It's not rocket science, but it works beautifully. Having the cam clamp directly under the cutter has other advantages. A board is set with a sharp pin and allowing you to spin a circle. This profiles a round tabletop for a spindle table. And there's more. Place a rounded board exactly under the cutter and you have a setup for pin routing. Here we're making the spindle table legs. This profile is for a cupboard door using a cope and stick joint. To hold the rails, we need the box, which can take a stack of pieces at 90 degrees to the machine. To be honest, there's really nothing that a router table does that you can't do on a Woodrat. So, let's move on. Machine tenoners are prohibitively expensive for a small shop. The alternative is either yet another router jig that takes time to make and will, you betcha, never be used again, however long it gathers dust in the workshop, or a lot of setting of fences with your bandsaw. As someone said to me, 8 cuts and all of them wrong. But here with the Woodrat we have 4 cuts, straight, square and all of them perfect. The Woodrat is a tenoner. Ordinarily we have a 1-inch depth of cut, but see that I've put in 2 raising plates which will give an extra inch, and that means a 2-inch depth of cut, which is fine for most cabinet making work. Woodrat tenons are quite straightforward. You can make the whole gang. Stub tenons, double tenons, twin tenons and double twin, as well as simple laps and rebates. We guess that there are well over 120 different named woodworking joints, and that's before adding those complex joints used in Japanese temples. Each has its proper place and function, And the majority are easy. They come straight out of the machine, like dovetailing. Others need a little handwork to clean up. That's a knuckle joint. Or here, where you clean up the rounded corners left by the bit, square them up. That's tusk tenon. And yet others are difficult and take a lot of care. Each time, the Woodrat helps to make your joints square and exact fitting, which means that your carcasses or frames go together square and strong and true. Making all these joints becomes an end in itself. It can do, like stamp collecting. It's very tempting, for example, to make all those different kinds of dovetails, inlaid dovetails, and even invent new ones of your own. Let's make some furniture, starting with a simple bench, 3 pieces of wood and 2 sliding dovetails. Sliding dovetail is a favourite joint, partly because it's very difficult to make by hand and also because it's accurate, quick and easy on the Woodrat. Most joints start with the cutter zeroed on the top of the work. You can use the depthing foot of the router as it should be used. Well, very nearly. We've taken off the turret because it just gets in the way. Wind up the gauge using the scale. Next, let's cut the picture of the cutter into a piece of acrylic. The socket is, of course, the size and shape and depth of the joint we are going to make, which is dead useful information. The position of the cuts is given by the Woodrat centerliner, which gives the exact center of the cutter. Clamp the wood to the plate and you're set up for the dovetail housing. Move the work to the next position and cut. That does the 2 trenches. Let's look at the sliding tenon. We need to go back to the tenoning technique. We need to make a joint in the top of the uprights to fit the dovetail slot in the bench seat piece. We know that the joint must be the same size as the cutter. Its depth was given by the acrylic strip, and we haven't changed it. At the beginning of all this, we had the east-west registration with the cutter and the mark and the 2 fixed fences. Now, we can move this around to act north-south if we have the cutter and the wood brought together. And we now need a picture of the wood and a picture of the cutter. There's the real cutter at the back of the real wood. We now use the actual workpiece to mark out the picture of the wood onto the guide rails. And we can use the socket in the acrylic to mark out the joint on the picture of the wood. Then we can use the same socket in the acrylic to stand in for the real cutter. The real cutter is at the back of the real wood there, and the cutter template is now at the back of the picture of the wood. Here comes Woodrat Minimum Technology Solution number 2, Blue Tack. It's excellent stuff because you can stick the strip down exactly with it and it won't rattle loose. yet you can put it where you like and take it off again without marking the machine. Now, if we bring the cutter template forward to the picture of the joint here, we can cut the back side of the joint there. Now bring it to the front and we can cut the front side of the joint. See, we're going clockwise again to get a clean shoulder. And we can cut the stopped end with no trouble at all, as it's all in the same plane. Here's a nice thing. However the board is bowed, the joint will be dead straight. So there we have the sliding dovetail, which with a little practice will fit snug every time. Now this bench is just 3 boards joined together. It needs a little finessing now to make it into a piece of furniture. A chamfering bit like this will give you consistent chamfering to the edges. There we are, a low bench in American oak. Shelving is done in the same way. It's so much quicker than a mortise and tenon joint, and so much stronger than the Dado joint. I suppose one of the most necessary actions in woodwork is to put a leg on a table. The usual way is with a mortise and tenon joint, but the Woodrat can simply pull a sliding dovetail using the mitre box. Earlier, we made 4 tenons for a cupboard door. That's the top rail, that's the bottom rail, and we made the tenons themselves the same width. Using the same method that we used for the sliding dovetail, we made it the same width as this 10mm bit. Now we need a mortise for the tenons to go into. If the tenon is cut vertically, the mortise is usually cut horizontally. And for that, you need to make some kind of mortise rail or carriage to hold it. You make the mortise rail, using the Woodrat, of course, and it allows you to put the work in horizontally in front of the cam clamps and the fences. And the rail can act as a router fence, so you can run your pieces through to make the grooves. The groove is to take the panel and the tenons. It goes exactly down the line of the tenons, and that locates its position. The same setting is then taken for the grooves in the stiles. And when you cramp the stiles to the mortise rail, you can drop the mortises in this exact line also. That puts the tenon, which was made the same width as the bit, which is the same thickness as the groove, dead in line to drop into the mortise. And not by chance, the haunch on the tenon now fits into the groove to the right depth. And you can either square the mortises to fit the tenons, or leave them rounded so that you can take the whole thing apart, gives a little room for that. Or even you can round off the tenons, which is sometimes useful. By the way, the raised and fielded panel can be made on the mortise rail too. Note the size of the thing that can be worked on below the plate and how carefully you can hold it. Use a 1/2-inch panel cutter bit and clamp in the panel and cut on the down cut to get a clean shoulder to the panel. And back on the up cut to get a fine finish to the face of the fielding. And if you've polished up the cutting edge, it should cut as clean as a whistle. Now the whole door goes together, and with any luck it should just fit in the cupboard. Of course, we'll have to cut the horns off and pin the corners. You can then go on to sink the holes for the draw pegs, and even make the dowels themselves in the timber that you are using for the door. The same hole, cut with the same cutter in a block of wood, can be put to service as a dowel pop. Any cutter placed exactly over the opening will make dowels any size and of any wood, so you're never stuck for a doweling that suits the type of wood you're using. Look, this was used to fill the bolt holes on my workbench, all done the same way. You can see that a very few simply made accessories and add-ons can greatly extend the use of the Woodrat. Most of these are shop made out of MDF and just blocks of wood, but there's one that we do sell, and that's the mitre box. Actually, it will take the workpiece not just at 45 degrees, but at any angle from 0 to 90. It has a lot of uses, from mitering boards for secret dovetails to holding wood horizontal for dovetailing. This works in a similar way. We call it the sugar tongue vise. It's a piece of scrap with a saw cut down it, and you cut a socket to take the workpiece, and then cam it into the cam lock to hold the wood. It'll take any kind of awkward shape, and it'll take rectangles too, but here it is taking a spindle for a spindle table. Most of the work so far has been about individual pieces, and when you have a lot of similar pieces to make, you can clamp them together in a stack and treat them like a single block. All the pieces will be cut in one pass, all exactly the same. You can cut as many as 40 box or drawer sides in this way. This method can be used for dovetails or for finger joints or for batches of parts of toys. Marking out is done on the first board or on the guide rails. A cursor on the router plate is set up against the picture of all the joints, and the cutter is fixed at each position. This 3mm interval can be laid out on a PC. The cursor can be a scratch on a piece of acrylic or an actual cut made with the bit you are using. Move the cutter forward and we get the next cut, and so on. And the cutter burrows in like a woodworm, and you wonder if it'll ever come out again. It should do. If everything's firm, there's no danger of breakout, and it's very, very quick. As you can see, you can use any size of cutter, though I think that lots of narrow cuts are really classy. That's just my opinion. Up to now, we've used the Woodrat with the guide rails in place, working square. But for dovetailing, we need to reconfigure the machine because we'll be needing to cut not only straight, but also at the dovetail angles. The Woodrat makes dovetails in a totally different way than a dovetail jig. You'll have noticed that there's no talk of guide bushes anywhere. It just does not have them. With the guide bush in the way of the cutter, you're just cutting blind. The guidance, on the other hand, of the router is by the edge of the plate, not by any collar around the cutter. The cuts are positioned by the position of the spirals and of the center plate, leaving a clear view of the cut. When making dovetails with a router, the cutter cuts the socket, and that shapes the pin, and the form and the look of the dovetail pin depend absolutely on the elegance of the cutter. Whereas the industry has almost entirely gone over to tungsten carbide tipped or TCT cutters, the Woodrat is alone in recommending high-speed steel bits. We make no apology for this. If you're looking for a slim and elegant dovetail pin, you don't want chunky cutting edges welded to the structural shaft of your bit, even if they do never need sharpening. Here's the difference with the cutters. The first cut is Woodrat's DC5. It'll cut up to 32 millimeters deep, even with the smaller router. The second cut is with a TCT cutter with a larger width across the base, but notice that it only cuts 25 millimeters deep. The third cut is nearly 25 millimeters deep with Woodrat's DC4, but compare how slim the cut is. You'll find that the only manufacturer making a full range of exactly graded cutters that come close to matching classic hand-cut dovetails is Woodrat. And we have special fine dovetail cutters for draw fronts too. Although high-speed steel bits may get dull, they are so easy to sharpen, it's like sharpening a pencil. Don't let me give you the wrong impression here. You will need tungsten tip cutters for cutting man-made boards, MDF, and some silicious hardwoods. And no, you don't have to use Woodrat cutters for dovetails. There's no law on it. You can use any dovetail cutter you like with the Woodrat, knowing that you can always make pins to fit the tail sockets. Now let's get down to business. Let's put these four pieces together in a ring. They're cut and they're squared of course on the Woodrat, and mark them up with triangles so you can know what goes where and never go wrong. The end pieces take the pins, and the long pieces, the sides, take the tails. And you match the cutter to the end piece. Choose the smallest bit that you have that'll go through the wood. Too small, too large, just right. Exactly right for this wood thickness. Place the bit. The dovetail starts with a test stick. From a squarish section, I've bandsawed off a thin slat, leaving a thicker part. Take the thin piece. Zero the cutter onto the top of it, and using the end piece, depth the router by putting the piece underneath the depthing foot, between the depthing foot and the base. And now, as you push that away, drop the cutter, it will be depthed exactly the thickness of your end. So cut the socket in the middle of the test stick and transfer it to the marker position over here on the left. Now with a sharp pencil, draw the size and the shape of the socket, and hence the picture of the bit itself, onto the face of the machine. We call that the mark. Before you move anything, take the thick part of the stick and put it up under the bit. Move the router back, raise the wood a fraction and recam it. Now bring the router forward, cutting a groove in the top of the stick. The groove is, of course, exactly the same width as the bottom of the cutter. Now we're all set up, the test stick is all set, we'll use that later. And we are ready to cut the tails. The two sides go under the plate in cutter position there, and one of the ends on the left in marker position. The main benefit of having no guide bush is that there's no template. There's nothing to go out and have to buy every time you need a new spacing or a new joint. You get complete freedom, and all you need in order to place a joint is a pencil mark. So you can mark it out where you want. But if you want it nicely ordered, we have the parallelogram. And that works by squashing or expanding so that you can get 6, 5, 4, probably 5 is best for this. You get a visual reference. And a mark here, each side of the bars, will give you the position of your joints. Drop that down and place it under there. There we go. So that's the first position, second position, and so on. When you've finished all the tail sockets right through the project, you make one cutter change back to a straight bit. Which one to use? There are no rules. You just use the bigger the better, because as long as it's through between the sockets, between the pins, then you're fine. Now we open up the spirals to router, and we have two variables, the position of the button in the center plate and the angle of the spirals. Where do we put them? Now you'll be pleased to know that you can place the button without using any mathematics. Get the button position from the chart. We're using a DC3 there, and the 1/2" cut is already in the chuck. So we have a button position of 74 and a spiral position of 54. 74 for the button, 54 for the spirals. We can check this by placing the cutting edge of the straight bit against the edge of the groove on either side. Perfect. Now that we have the tail sockets all regular along the top of the board, we can use them to template the pins. And since we have an actual physical object to work from, we can have total accuracy. These two fold together. Pin position number 1. Cut a right-hand cut. There's no left here. Now track to the next pin position with number 2 socket against the mark. Cut a right and a left. Get to the next pin position, P3. Cut a right and then a left. And so on. The next pin, the last pin has only a left-hand cut. Repeat for all 4 corners. Our little chest of drawers here shows the smallest Woodrat dovetail drawer front, and the drawer itself is fitting into the largest dovetail that we do. And so that must be the widest range of dovetail for any dovetailer in existence. Here are the prepared pieces. The front is selected for its decorative quality, and it's thick enough to take any veneer, moulding or inlay or decoration. And the contents will try and hammer the joints apart over the years, so we need nice deep dovetails in the sides. The wood of the sides is traditionally light and quite thin. Unlike some jigs, the Woodrat has no difficulty with this thinness, nor how closely you space the pins. Do the front tails first, then the back tails. With your cutting gauge, gauge the depth of the tails and transfer that depth onto the end of the drawer fronts. Place the larger Allen key in the center plate with the star knob in place. Now cut the drawer front pins in the same way as for through dovetails, but as you come forward to the scribed line, tighten the knob. Now you can cut the pins using the drawer side with tails as a template as usual. When all are done, the drawer fronts are stacked up together in the vise and the rounded corners nipped out with a skew chisel. This is quite easy, as the line of the cut is given by the scribed line and the edge of the pins. Now you can plough the grooves for the bottom. And thickness the drawer bottom if necessary. And there we have a classic handmade drawer, all ready for gluing up. You can see from all this that the Woodrat covers all the basic elements of joinery and cabinet making. frames and panel doors and carcassing and shelving and boxes and trays and drawers. It all started with an idea, and the idea developed far beyond where we ever dreamed it could go. And in the nature of these things, one idea uncovers a new idea, and so it's a never-ending process. There's no limit to what you can do. Contact us today by fax, phone, email, or even writing. Buy the machine and get stuck in, and then we can all take the art further. There's lots more for us to tell, and we have lots more to learn from each other.
Mill it down easy. Mill it down easy. Mill it down easy if you really wanna blow your child.